I'm Feli. Huh? It's the German nickname of Felicia. I'm German. Oh, that's so cool. I'm German too. Ach, du bist auch Deutsch. Well, I don't actually speak German. Huh? Hallo, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Felicia. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio on and off since 2016. Today is a special day because October 6th is German-American Day. The day celebrates German-American heritage and commemorates the founding of Germantown in Pennsylvania in the year 1683, which is now part of Philadelphia. I'll share some more information about the history of the day later. First, let's talk about German heritage in the US in general. How German is this country really, and what impact did German immigrants and German culture have? Let's start with some numbers. According to the American Community Survey by the United States Census Bureau, there were approximately 43 million Americans in 2019 who had full or partial German ancestry. That's about 13% of the US population, which means they're the largest of all self-reported ancestry groups in the survey. Now, of course, most of the people with German ancestry have become Americanized over time, and today less than 5% speak German. The first German immigrants arrived as early as 1670 in the British colonies, and the population grew more and more every year. Up until the 1850s, it was mainly farmers who were looking for a better life and more productive land in the New World. Other reasons for the immigration were religious freedom, as some religious groups were persecuted in Central Europe, or the military conscription. Now, the biggest wave of German immigrants arrived later, in the 19th century and the turn of the century, so around 1900. In numbers, it was over 8 million German immigrants that arrived over the course of the 19th century. As a direct result, Germans were the largest group of immigrants in the US between 1820 and 1880. Most of this had to do with the unstable situation leading up to, and then also after, the German Revolution of 1848. Among the immigrants were many liberal revolutionists who had fought for a unified German national state against the conservative aristocracy. They were called 48ers because of the revolution in 1848, and many of them were professionals, journalists, and politicians. Here's an overview of how many German immigrants came to the United States in different time periods. In addition to what I already mentioned, there were numerous other migrant groups coming over at different times and for different reasons, such as the Latin settlement of the so-called Freidenker, freethinker movement in the 1830s, or a wave of Protestant Germans in the early 1700s. As you can see, there was also a spike during the time of the Depression and rise of the Nazi movement, as well as in the 1950s, after World War II. Now, where were the main settlement spots for German immigrants? The very first Germans arrived together with English settlers at Jamestown, Virginia. The first permanent German settlement, however, was then founded on October 6, 1683 as Germantown, Pennsylvania. That's the anniversary that we're celebrating today on German-American Day, even though technically most of those settlers were actually Dutch. In addition to Pennsylvania, Germans also settled in upstate New York, the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, and Louisiana along the so-called German coast, which was especially attractive for Germans from the Alsace region and Swiss people because Louisiana was predominantly French. Germans then continued to settle in Massachusetts and New England, but also in the southeast in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, and later spreading out to Texas, Missouri, and all the way west to California. So German settlers were found pretty much all over the place, but with concentrated spots on the East Coast in places like New York, Baltimore, and Hoboken, and cities here in the Midwest, including Chicago, so Illinois, Milwaukee in Wisconsin, St. Louis in Missouri, Cleveland, Ohio, and here in Cincinnati. Cincinnati has a huge German heritage, and Ohio in general is among the top 3 states with German ancestry in the US. Around the year 1900, Cincinnati was more than 40% German American, and the strong German heritage here in Cincinnati is still very noticeable today. Whenever I meet people here and they find out I'm German, a common response is, oh, I'm German too, by which they usually mean that they have German ancestry, and then they tell me their German last name or where in Germany their ancestors were from. There are also tons of German restaurants, breweries, and societies here. Some of you guys may remember me talking about a whole project that I did on German heritage in Cincinnati during my master's program 2 years ago. It's an audio series on different places of German heritage here, and I announced that I would publish that on my YouTube channel as well at some point. But as you may have noticed, I haven't done that so far because I just haven't gotten to it yet, because I need to still put it into video form from the audio format, but I will still do that, I promise. Now, in addition to the Midwest, which also included places like Michigan and Indiana, there were also major German populations in Iowa and Nebraska around the turn of the century. To this day, there is a so-called German belt that goes all the way from East Pennsylvania to Oregon on the West Coast, and Cincinnati is also part of what's called the German Triangle between Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. In all three of those places, German is still the most reported ancestry to this day. Overall, the American Community Survey of 2019 shows that in more than 23 states, German is the top reported ancestry, and among all ancestries, it's the #1 ancestry of people in the Midwest, #2 for people in the West, and #3 in the Northeast and South. The biggest population with German ancestry is in Pennsylvania to this day, then California, and then Ohio. The regions with the highest percentage of people born in Germany, however, are in Florida, New Jersey, and Texas. That's probably because those places are popular among Germans who come to the US nowadays. So as I just mentioned, around the year 1900, German Americans made up about 40 to 60% of the population in some places. There were countless German breweries, societies, as well as German-speaking newspapers and schools around. A lot of the German immigrants gathered in German-speaking districts called Germania, where they could live a life in their native language and maintain their culture. One of the most famous examples of that is a neighborhood here in Cincinnati called Over the Rhine that the German immigrants gave this name because when you looked at it from downtown, the neighborhood was located on the other side of a canal that they had called the Rhein, based on what they knew from home. So the neighborhood was located over the Rhine. It was very densely populated. At its peak, around 1900, the neighborhood had 45,000 residents and almost twice as many buildings as it does today. In fact, it was the most densely populated neighborhood in the whole country at one point, even ahead of Manhattan. Most of the immigrants there lived in tenement buildings, where each family had 2 to 3 rooms, which, considering that most of them had 4 or more children, wasn't a lot of space. They shared a water spigot in the yard with cold water, and there were outdoor privies to use the restroom. It wasn't until after the 1880s that sewage was available to hook up the outdoor privies to plumbing. In Over the Rhine and similar enclaves all over the country, German immigrants could pretty much live their entire lives in German. From street names to businesses, church services, and restaurants, everything was in German. The kids went to German language schools, and there were more than 800 German-speaking newspapers, which made up more than 2/3 of all foreign language newspapers in the country. More than 170 of those newspapers operated here in Cincinnati alone. Now, many Germans organized themselves in various societies, Vereine. Just to give a few examples, there were things like Sängerbund, so a choir, Schützenvereine, so shooting clubs, bowling leagues, religious societies, and one of the most influential societies, the Turners. Turner in German, which literally just means gymnasts. The Turner or Turner movement started back in Germany in 1811, and they quickly became much more than just a gymnastics society. Many Turner members belonged to the 48er revolutionists and the freethinkers, and since many of those came to the US throughout the 19th century, they brought the Turner movement with them. The first Turner Society in the US was founded here in Cincinnati in 1848, in the Over the Rhine district. Now, as promised, you guys will get a whole series on German heritage here in Cincinnati, but the Turners weren't only relevant here, they quickly spread throughout the whole country and soon had over 700 local Turner societies. With their motto being a sound mind and a sound body, the Turners influenced much more than just the way that people exercised. They supported public education funded by taxes, physical education and art instruction in school, labor unions, the 40-hour work week, the women's vote, and during the Civil War, there was a whole regiment, Ohio 9th, of Germans, with most of them being Turners, fighting for the Union, so against slavery. It wasn't just the Turners, but all parts of German American life that were hit hard by World War I, especially once the US joined the war in 1917 to fight against Germany. The so-called anti-German hysteria, or simply put, anti-German sentiment, led to a rapid decline of German culture in the US. Countless German societies and newspapers stopped existing because it wasn't considered politically correct to be German. German street names were changed to English ones, German-speaking schools as well as meetings held in the German language became illegal, and people who were German or of German descent were discriminated against, persecuted, and sometimes even lynched. Many of them changed, or at least anglicized, their last names during that time. German businesses and societies took the German out of their name to stay under the radar. The German-American Bank became the Lincoln National Bank and Trust Company, for example. The North Cincinnati Turners changed their name to North Cincinnati Gymnasium, and Berghoff Brewery changed its motto from a very German brew to a very good brew. Since alcohol played a major role for a lot of the meeting spots within the German community, like beer halls, breweries, or even the German societies that usually made a lot of their money with their beer sales, the start of Prohibition in 1920 made the situation even worse for German Americans in the US. The number of German restaurants, breweries, and societies, as well as people openly identifying as German, dropped drastically during that time and never really recovered. While World War II had a negative impact on German Americans as well, it wasn't nearly as significant because by that time, German Americans were thoroughly assimilated and weren't even looked at as a distinctive ethnic group anymore. Now, despite all of that, German Americans have left remarkable traces in this country that you can see to this day, such as the custom of having a Christmas tree, for example. And no, the Christmas pickle is not a tradition that was brought over by Germans, that's just a myth. Germans also introduced the concept of kindergartens, and then, of course, many foods were brought over from Germany, such as pretzels, different sausages like Frankfurter/Wiener, which became the American hot dog, Bratwurst, Strudel, Sauerkraut, and even hamburgers. Here in Ohio, German immigrants also made Gouda popular, which is a dish that we don't really know in Germany. It was kind of based on a local dish called Grützwurst, but the immigrants here stretched it with oats and other things because they didn't have a lot of money for meat, and it kind of became its own dish. And Germans also introduced America to lager beer, which is now the most produced style of beer in the US. Then, of course, to this day, you can find different German dialects and ethnic groups in the US, such as Pennsylvania Dutch, for example, which developed from the Germans who settled in Pennsylvania. So even though it's called Dutch, it's actually German. It's closely related to Palatine dialects, so Pfälzisch, but has a big English influence as well. It's still spoken by Amish and Mennonite groups and has about 300,000 native speakers in the US and Canada. There's also Hutterite German and Plautdeutsch, which is similar to the dialect Plattdeutsch in Germany. In addition to that, there's a group of dialects called Texas German or Texasdeutsch that was spoken by German immigrants that settled in Texas in the mid-19th century. Today, it's almost extinct though. Now, speaking of the German language in America, you'll often hear people say that German almost became the official language of the US, but then it ended up being English. That's actually a myth called the Muhlenberg legend. The truth is, there was never a proposal for anything like that, and the US doesn't have an official language in that sense. Among all those German immigrants and their descendants, there were many famous ones that had a big impact on the US, and I'll make a whole video about some of them at some point, but I figured I'd mention at least a few in this video, such as Henry J. Heinz, who invented Heinz ketchup. He was born to German immigrants in Pennsylvania. Then you could mention Wilhelm Boeing, whose parents were named Boeing and came to the US in 1868. Levi Strauss, who was actually born in the Franconian area in Germany as Loeb Strauss and who started the first blue jeans company, Levi's. Bernhard Kroger, who was born here in Cincinnati to German immigrants in 1860 and is the founder of the nationwide supermarket chain Kroger. Or John A. Roebling, who was born as Röbling in the Kingdom of Prussia, but emigrated to America as a young adult, where he not only built the famous Roebling Suspension Bridge here in Cincinnati, but later also the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. And let's not forget that almost half of all current beer sales in the United States go back to German immigrants, such as Captain A. Pabst, Eberhard Anheuser, and Adolphus Busch, who founded Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis in 1860. German Americans also played significant roles in both the Independence War and the Civil War in the US. One important person here was Baron von Steuben, who was a former Prussian officer and who helped make the victory against the British possible in the War of Independence. Last but not least, let's go back to the initial reason for this video, German-American Day. So again, it's the anniversary of the founding of Germantown on October 6th, 1683, which nowadays is in northwest Philadelphia in the state of Pennsylvania. It was founded by Germans as well as Quaker and Mennonite families, which are both religious groups, and apparently most of them were actually Dutch and not German, but had relocated to Germany before they came to the New World. That's why up until 1709, the town was mainly Dutch-speaking until some bigger groups of German immigrants resettled there from Delaware. Germantown became the birthplace of the anti-slavery movement in 1688 because they organized the first petition in the English colonies to abolish slavery, and Germantown was also the site of a Revolutionary War battle. The holiday itself was first celebrated in Philadelphia in 1883 for the 200th anniversary of Germantown. Back then it was simply called German Day though, and people even started similar celebrations in other parts of the country until the custom died out during World War I. The holiday was then revived in 1983 when President Ronald Reagan proclaimed October 6th as German-American Day to celebrate and honor the 300th anniversary of German immigration and German culture in the United States, and it's been celebrated ever since. Now, I know that was a lot of information. Let me know in the comments below if you're interested in hearing my 5-piece project on German heritage in Cincinnati, and if you'd like to learn more about famous people in the US who were German immigrants or kids of German immigrants. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, make sure to subscribe to this channel for free, and if you want to, you can even activate the little bell so that you don't miss out on any of my videos in the future. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by hitting the super thanks button down below, or just visit my Patreon or buy me a coffee page. Links are in the info box, just like all of my social media platforms. If you're German American yourself, make sure to check out my shop felifromgermany.com because you can get the perfect t-shirt for yourself. I'm not technically qualified to wear it myself, I just wore it for the photo, but I know that many of you guys are. If you have any additional information on the topic that you want to share, you're very welcome to do so in the comments below, and I hope I'll see you next time. Tschüss!